I'd like to offer a few reflections on the subject of God's goodness. One of the videos that I made a while back, a viewer of that video, we exchanged a series of comments back and forth to each other centered around the subject of God's goodness. And my hope was to offer some further reflections on this subject because of the difficulty of putting into a few words in the comment section on underneath the videos. And I think the topic is significant enough to think about God's goodness. I've noticed also in recent days and in some other videos that I hope to create that there is a fair amount of debate on this subject of the goodness of God. And I think, in my own mind, I find very helpful the insights of St. Thomas Aquinas on this subject. St. Thomas, largely borrowing from Aristotle, sees goodness as one of the ways in which we view being or reality. He calls goodness one of the transcendentals of being. There are certain words, or there's a small handful of words, that we can use to describe any being. Anything that exists, we can call it a being. It is. It's a thing. It's an existing thing, or it's an existing reality. We can also call any existing thing one. We can use the word one to refer to any existing being, because if it's not one, if there's nothing unifying it, if there's no actual identity of the thing that makes it a unit or an individual object, then it doesn't exist. Also, Aquinas and Aristotle say that the word true is a word that can describe every being. In this sense, the word true is being used as a way of speaking of being as known. When we know something, it is true. When we know reality, there is truth, because there's a correspondence between what exists beyond myself or outside of myself and what exists within myself. So for instance, if I say that there are 5 people in the room right now, and there really are 5 people in the room, then the proposition that I formulated based on some insight within myself or some awareness of reality outside of myself is a truth, because what is inside of me corresponds, or my awareness of reality inside of me corresponds to what is really the case. So the word true can refer to any being in the sense that it is known as a being or as a reality. So we can use the word one, we can use the word being, we can use the word true of any reality. Aquinas also argues that the word good can be used of any reality, and the reason for that is that the word good refers to being as desired. Being as desired. And Aquinas thinks, as well as Aristotle, that to be, or to exist, is greater than to not exist. To not exist is the absence of being altogether, the absence of reality. So any existing being, to the degree that it is differentiated from non-being or non-existence, is good. But good in this sense is describing a reality from the standpoint of its desirability. So if I see let's say some food and I'm hungry, and I say that is good food, or that is good, what I mean by that is I find that object or that food desirable. For what purpose? Well, because in some sense it will enhance my being. So when I eat the food, it completes me, or it satisfies me, or it gives me the energy that I need, or it gives me the taste that I want. So when I say the food is good, I see in it something that will enhance me or will complete me, and therefore I find it desirable. So for Aquinas, anything that is fulfilling, or that we view as fulfilling or desirable, something that completes us in some sense, is good. Now, both Aristotle and Aquinas think that God is supremely good. And the reason why they think this it's a complicated thing to describe in its fullness, but essentially the way they understand it is this: that every being in its strivings in this world, let's take a simple example like an apple seed. The apple seed strives, or its motion inclines it towards some fulfillment, which in this case would be becoming a full-grown apple-producing tree. So the apple seed unconsciously, presumably, strives toward becoming a full-grown apple-producing tree. What is it that draws that motion? What is it that causes the motion of the the apple seed to progress? Well, according to Aristotle and Aquinas, the apple seed tends toward the fullness of its own being. It tends toward its own perfection or completeness. Now, of course, there are many things that may prohibit it from achieving its perfection, but its motions or its tendencies are toward becoming a perfect or complete tree. And so the motion of the seed is toward the actualization of the possibilities of the seed. And that's what the seed desires, not in a conscious sense, but that's what it's longing toward or what it's moving toward, is the actualization of the possibilities of that seed. Now, according to Aquinas and Aristotle, all things that undergo motion, intrinsic motion, or even just motion altogether, are tending toward some type of completion or some actualization of a possibility of their own being. And if we look at that under the term of desire, that it is moving toward it, or its inclination is toward that fullness or that completeness of that thing, then we would call that its good. So the good of the apple seed is becoming an apple-producing tree, or the good of a human infant is toward becoming a grown-up, independent human being, or whatever. We could go through virtually anything that undergoes motion, and we could describe it in terms of reaching some type of perfection or some type of actualization. Now, if we think about goodness in that sense, then all goodness or all motion in things toward their goodness is in fact a tendency toward perfection, a tendency toward full actualization. But for both Aristotle and Aquinas, the most complete and actualized reality is God. God is the first perfectly actualized reality. And so everything else is imperfect and potential in respect to its own actualization. So what is it that is drawing or that is directing all things toward their full actualization? Well, for both of these thinkers, Aristotle and Aquinas, it's God, the supremely actualized, that all things are desiring resemblance to. Everything wants to be like the most perfect, the most complete, the most actualized. And so all imperfect things undergo a striving toward perfect actuality, which is God. And if you buy that, if you accept that approach to what goodness is, and I personally find it very compelling, if you take that vision of things, that the motions of things are toward their actualization, but it's toward their actualization so that they might resemble the first cause or the first reality. If you accept that, or you approach reality that way, I think you'll come to see that for Aristotle and Aquinas, God is the ultimately and most supremely desirable reality, and therefore God is infinitely good. And everything that strives towards its own actualization and its own perfection is striving to be like God, its supreme cause. So with us as human beings, as we seek to perfect our whole being or complete our whole being, whether that be physically, whether it be morally, spiritually, intellectually, as we strive toward the full actualization of reality, we're trying to become more and more like God, our cause. In that sense, if you see the vision of things, that all of nature in its motions, in its becomingness, is being drawn or pulled by God, as almost like the ultimate magnet that draws all things toward itself. And that's the ultimate cause of the becomingness of nature. This is an age-old question. What is it that accounts for the motions or the actualizing of the potentialities of nature? Why isn't nature just a static or unmoving pool of energy? What is it that causes its continual actualizing? What is it that pulls the becomingness of the universe all the way from the Big Bang down to the present? We call them laws of physics and so on, but laws of physics are simply our description of the way that nature tends to behave. But what's the ultimate ground of the actualizing of that nature? Or to take even Stephen Hawking's word, he talks about in his older book, The Brief History of Time, he talks about the understanding the world in terms of various equations that allow us to understand or to explain why it works the way that it does. But then he asks the question, what is it that breathes life into the equations? that image comes to mind. What is it that pulls reality so that it will act according to these various constraints or these various principles that seem to govern the world around us? For Aristotle and Aquinas, the motion of the world is ultimately explained by a supremely attractive and therefore supremely good ground of all reality, a supremely perfect, fully actualized reality that is infinitely good. Now, what are the implications of this for things like morality? Because we're talking here about the term good as more of a metaphysical term, that it refers to all of reality. It's a way of describing reality in its strivings toward perfection. So what does this have to do with morality? Well, when we talk about human beings, we're talking about a striving toward actualization that involves freedom, that involves choice. So as we are striving to become good, or we're striving toward our own perfection, it includes a power of self-determination so that I can choose to become more like God or more fully actualized, or I can choose something less. And that brings with it certain moral responsibility. I'm responsible for the choice that I make, either to become more actualized or more complete or more perfect, or I can choose to become less than that, or choose my completion in something less than what will truly and objectively make me perfect. Now, this whole concept that I'm talking about here of all of nature striving toward its supreme good, I think has some interesting implications, and let me just mention a couple, and then I'll stop with this and bring up some things later on, perhaps in future videos. But one of the implications of this is that this concept is what grounds ultimately natural law theory, at least of what we find in Aristotle and Aquinas. Natural law theory here being that nature has tendencies within it toward the completion or perfection of certain beings. This will underground virtue theory, that there are certain things about us as human beings that we should become habituated toward doing certain kinds of actions that are toward our highest good or toward our highest perfection or completeness. So this whole idea of nature as striving toward its good so that it will become like its God is the foundation of natural law. Furthermore, it also gives to us a basis for trusting in human reason as a guide to what our good would be. Human reason is deeply challenged by trying to understand what is the ultimate good of the human person. There's all kinds of hindrances and distractions and biases and habits and so on that restrict our clear thinking about moral questions. But human reason is a power for trying to discern the tendencies of nature and the tendencies of the world around us, and what would be the rational or the intellectual good of the human person. In other words, thinking about the human good, how do I achieve it and how do I get there? Thinking those thoughts, guided by the very structures of our nature and where it's going and what its tendencies are, is in fact the essence of natural law thinking. And furthermore, my final point is that this vision of what goodness is also shows us why God is the ultimate ground of all morality. For if there is no ultimate ground that justifies or explains the tendencies or the motions of things toward a supreme good, if there is no such supreme good, then it simply becomes the aimless strivings of nature with no ultimate explanation of why they're striving the way that they are, or any ultimate source of justification for the strivings of nature in one way rather than another. I understand that the comments that I've made probably have raised, for those that follow along with them, perhaps more questions than I've resolved. But my primary objective in offering these thoughts is to try to give some insight into the meaning of the word goodness or good. Because in much discussion going on nowadays, it seems as if there's no real sense of what the word good itself means. And in this case, good is a transcendental term that's ultimately grounded in God.